It was a gray Tuesday when I bought the car that would change everything. A 2018 Honda Civic, silver, modest, reliable, and completely unremarkable. I hadn't been looking for an adventure. I just needed a way to get to my dead-end job and back to an apartment where silence had become a roommate. The salesman had looked as tired as I felt. He said the previous owner had passed away, that it was an estate sale, clean title, well-maintained. I nodded, barely listening, just wanting to sign the papers and get back to my routine of existing instead of living. That night, I sat in the car, trying to connect my phone to the Bluetooth. The display glowed softly in the dark, and that's when I noticed it. One saved GPS address, labeled simply home. My thumb hovered over the delete button, but something made me stop. A small, stupid curiosity. Where had the previous owner considered home? I stared at the glowing word for a long moment, then shrugged and shut off the screen. It was nothing, just data left behind. Still, it stuck with me. 4 days later, that curiosity became a decision. It was a Saturday morning, dull and quiet, and I had no plans, no friends waiting, no one to text, nowhere to be. The idea of following that GPS address felt ridiculous and yet strangely necessary, like scratching an itch I didn't know I had. So I packed a travel mug of bad coffee, slid into the Civic, and pressed Navigate. The robotic voice guided me through city streets, then to highways that stretched farther than I'd driven in months. The world outside my windows shifted from buildings to open fields, from noise to silence. The farther I drove, the lighter I felt, though I couldn't say why. Maybe it was the illusion of movement, maybe the idea that going anywhere was better than staying nowhere. After an hour, the roads narrowed into pine-shaded curves. The GPS arrow pointed higher and higher until the air grew sharp and thin. Finally, the voice said, "You have arrived at your destination." But there was no house, no sign of life, just a small mountain overlook carved out of the hillside, a wooden railing, and a single bench facing the valley below. The view was stunning, the kind that makes you quiet without meaning to. Endless forests fading into blue ridges, sunlight slicing through distant clouds. And on that bench sat an old man, still and patient, as if he'd been waiting. I stepped out of the car, gravel crunching beneath my shoes. The man turned toward me slowly, his weathered face calm, eyes steady. Then, with a faint smile, he said something that froze me where I stood. "You came." His tone wasn't surprised. It was expectant, like someone greeting an appointment they always knew would arrive. Confused, I took a few hesitant steps closer. "Do I know you?" I asked. He looked past me at the car. "No," he said softly, "but I know that car. It belonged to my son, Michael Carver. He died 8 months ago." The words hit harder than I expected, like a sudden drop you didn't see coming. I tried to apologize, stumbling over words, explaining I'd bought it from a dealership that I didn't know. He just nodded, eyes distant, as if my explanation didn't matter. "It's all right," he said. "That's how it was supposed to happen." Then he extended a trembling hand. "I'm Thomas." We shook hands, and he gestured for me to sit. For a moment I hesitated. Everything about the situation felt surreal. The mountain air, the silence, this stranger who spoke as though destiny had a schedule. But something about his calmness, the quiet certainty in his voice, made it impossible to walk away. I sat down beside him. He began to talk, not slowly, but as if the story had been waiting for air. "Michael was 32 years old when he died," Thomas said. "Cancer, the kind that starts quietly and ends brutally.
He'd never smoked, never been careless with his health. It just happened. By the time they found it, it was everywhere. He fought for a year, then he lost. Thomas's voice trembled, though his posture stayed upright, proud somehow. He said Michael had been an adventure photographer. After his mother died when he was 12, it had been just the two of them, father and son, best friends, traveling partners. This place, he said, looking out at the horizon, was their spot. They'd stumbled upon it during a road trip when Michael was 14 and had come back again and again for graduations, birthdays, and moments when life got too heavy. They'd scattered his mother's ashes here. When Michael got sick, he wanted to return one last time, but the illness made even walking to the window exhausting. In those final weeks, Thomas said, Michael asked him to do something strange. He'd programmed this overlook into his car's GPS, labeling it home. He said that whoever bought the car next, if they were the right kind of person, would be curious enough to follow it. I listened, stunned. But why? I finally asked. Thomas turned to me, eyes glistening with a fragile kind of hope. He said, because he believed the universe brings people together for reasons. He told me, Dad, whoever buys this car and comes here, they'll be searching for something, even if they don't know it yet. Be there for them. Tell them my story. Complete the journey for me. For a while, neither of us spoke. The only sounds were wind through the pines and the low rustle of leaves brushing against the railing. I tried to make sense of it. The dead man's message, the old father's faith, the strange coincidence that had pulled me here. Thomas said he'd been coming to the Overlook every Saturday since his son's death, waiting for whoever would follow that GPS. Most weeks no one comes, he said quietly, but I keep my promise. My throat tightened. I almost deleted the address, I admitted. I thought it was just leftover data. He smiled, a small, tearful smile. But you didn't. You followed it. That's what Michael believed in. Curiosity. The kind that makes people follow roads that don't make sense. I looked at the view again. The world stretched endlessly before us, wild, alive, and silent. I didn't know this man, or his son, or why I'd really come, but sitting there beside him, something inside me shifted, something I hadn't felt in years. A quiet reminder that maybe being lost wasn't the same as being hopeless. Maybe it just meant you hadn't found the right road yet. The wind grew colder. Thomas looked toward the valley, then back at me. You know, Ben, he said softly, you didn't come here by mistake. I didn't answer. I just watched the horizon and thought, for the first time in a long time, that maybe he was right. We sat there for a long time, neither of us speaking. The air was cold enough to sting, but neither of us seemed to notice. Thomas looked like he was holding 1,000 memories in silence, and I was too overwhelmed to interrupt. Finally he exhaled, a long, tired breath that seemed to come from somewhere far older than his years. Michael, he began again, wasn't supposed to be a photographer. He went to college for business because it was the sensible thing to do. Got a job at an insurance company, wore suits, went to meetings, sat under fluorescent lights, and pretended to have it all figured out. But he was miserable, completely empty. Thomas paused, looking down at his hands. Then one day he bought a cheap camera from a pawn shop, just because he was curious. That one small decision changed everything. Within a year, he'd quit his job and was traveling with nothing but that camera and a backpack. He said the camera made him pay attention to life again, made him see it. I listened, imagining a younger man behind the wheel of the same car I'd bought, driving through deserts, forests, cities, chasing light instead of paychecks. Michael believed that curiosity was sacred. He used to say that people spend their lives trying to find meaning, but meaning isn't something you find once. It's something you keep discovering every time you follow a question instead of ignoring it. He looked at me. "You followed one today." The words landed softly but deeply. I didn't answer. I couldn't, because he was right. I hadn't come here for adventure or closure or even interest. I'd come because I was restless, because I'd lost the ability to feel alive. Maybe I was exactly the kind of person Michael had imagined. Thomas went on, telling me about his son's last year, the chemo, the days spent in hospital rooms where walls hummed with machines instead of wind, the nights he couldn't sleep because the pain wouldn't let him. Through it all, Michael kept his camera beside him. Even when he couldn't hold it steady, he'd ask Thomas to take pictures of the smallest things: the light through the blinds, a nurse's smile, the sky through a hospital window. He said beauty didn't stop existing just because you were dying, Thomas whispered. When the doctors finally told them there was nothing more to be done, Michael spent an entire evening talking about life, about how people always say they'll live once things make sense, once they have a plan, once everything lines up. But once never comes. You just live now or you don't. Then Thomas said something that made the world feel still. 2 nights before he passed, Michael told me, "Dad, I want to leave one last photograph, but not the kind you hang on a wall. I want to leave a moment that keeps living. Someone will find it, someone who needs it. You'll know when they do." I swallowed hard. "That's why you've been coming here every week." He nodded. "Every Saturday, for 8 months. Sometimes I sit for hours and no one comes, but I promised him I'd be here." There was so much tenderness in his voice that I couldn't look at him without feeling my chest ache. He said the person who followed the GPS would be someone searching. He wanted me to tell them what he learned, to finish what he started. The silence that followed felt holy. I didn't know this man or his son, but somehow both of them had reached into my life like a thread pulling through fabric I thought was torn beyond repair. Thomas turned toward me again, his eyes gentle but piercing. "So tell me, Ben, what are you searching for?" The question cut straight through me. I tried to deflect with a half laugh, but it came out empty. "I guess I'm searching for something that makes sense. I'm 26. I work at a call center. I wake up every day wondering if this is it, if this is all life's supposed to be."
Thomas nodded, as if that answer was exactly what he expected. "Michael said something like that when he was your age. He told me once, 'I think we mistake confusion for failure, but maybe being lost is how you know you're moving.'" I looked at him, trying to absorb it. "He sounds incredible." "He was," Thomas said softly. "But he wasn't special. He was just awake. That's what made him different. Most people walk through life like sleepwalkers, doing what they're told, wanting what they're supposed to want. But Michael, he paid attention. He followed whatever stirred something in him, even if it didn't make sense, especially if it didn't make sense." The sky was turning orange now, the kind of light that makes everything look softer, as if the world is forgiving you for all the things you've done wrong. Thomas looked out at the horizon and smiled faintly. He loved this time of day, said it was proof that endings can be beautiful too. I didn't trust my voice enough to speak, so I just sat with him, both of us watching the sun sink into the valley. When the last edge of light disappeared, Thomas reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small envelope, creased and worn at the corners. "Michael left this," he said quietly. "He wrote it in his final weeks. He told me to give it to whoever followed the GPS address." He handed it to me, his fingers trembling. The paper felt fragile, almost sacred. I opened it carefully, the way you might open something that could break if you breathed too hard. Inside was a handwritten letter, the ink slightly smudged. It began simply, "To whoever is reading this, you bought my car, and you were curious enough to follow a GPS address to nowhere. That tells me something about you." I could feel my heart beat in my throat as I read on. "You're searching. Maybe you don't know what for, but you're looking. I'm dying as I write this. I'm 32, and I have maybe a month left. And the biggest thing I've learned is that life isn't about having it all figured out. It's about curiosity, about following the thing that stirs you, even when it doesn't make sense." My eyes blurred as the words began to swim on the page. "You followed curiosity today. You could have deleted that address, but you didn't. You said yes to something small, and that's beautiful. That's what living really is. My dad is probably with you now. Talk to him. Let him tell you about me, and then go find your own adventures. They don't have to be big. They just have to make you feel alive." The letter ended with a line that I'll never forget. "Don't wait until you're dying to realize the point of life is to live it." By the time I finished, my vision was swimming. I looked up at Thomas, and his face was streaked with tears, but he was smiling through them. I folded the letter back carefully, holding it as if it might disappear if I let go. We sat in silence again, the kind that doesn't need to be filled. The sun was gone, but the sky still glowed faintly pink, as though Michael himself had left a last trace of light behind. And for the first time in 2 years, I felt something shift inside me. Something warm, fragile, and quietly alive. It wasn't joy exactly. It was the sense that maybe I hadn't been lost at all. Maybe I'd just been waiting to find this. Thomas looked at me as we stood to leave. "Will you come back?" he asked softly. "Yes," I said immediately, "if that's okay." He nodded, eyes glistening. "It's more than okay." As I drove back down the mountain in the dark, the letter rested on the passenger seat beside me. The GPS screen was blank now, but for the first time I felt like I was heading somewhere that mattered. I went back the following Saturday, and then the one after that, and the one after that. It wasn't planned, not at first. I just woke up, made coffee, and found myself driving toward the mountains without thinking. The GPS didn't need to guide me anymore. My hands already knew the way. Each week, Thomas was there. Same bench, same flannel jacket, same quiet greeting that felt like both a welcome and a ritual. We didn't always talk about Michael. Sometimes we just sat, watching the light change across the valley, listening to wind rustle through pine needles. But slowly the silences began to fill with stories. He told me about the road trips he and Michael used to take, how they'd stop in forgotten towns, eat at diners where the pancakes were always better than expected, and take photos of strangers who'd never know they'd been remembered. Michael's photos, he said, were never about perfection. They were about truth. He captured moments the way most people miss them. An old couple holding hands, a tired waitress laughing at a joke, a sunset reflected in the window of a gas station. He saw beauty in things everyone else walked past. Maybe that's why he didn't waste time chasing big things. He already knew the small ones mattered most. I started to tell Thomas my own stories, though they felt small by comparison.
About my job at the call center, the endless ringing phones, the people yelling about cable outages like it was the end of the world. About the nights I'd stare at the ceiling wondering when life was supposed to start. He listened without judgment. Sometimes he'd nod, sometimes he'd just watch the sky. And little by little, the shame I'd carried about not being enough began to loosen its grip. One afternoon, after a few months of visits, I told him, "I've been thinking about taking a photography class." He smiled, the first real, unguarded smile I'd ever seen from him. "Then take it," he said. "Don't wait until you're ready. Curiosity doesn't wait." So, I did.
The class was at a community college downtown, one evening a week. It was basic: exposure, composition, lighting. But from the moment I held that camera, something in me lit up. It felt like learning a language I'd always known but had forgotten how to speak. For the first time in years, I looked at the world and wanted to see it again. Every shadow, every reflection, every fleeting bit of color felt like proof that something beautiful was still happening around me. I told Thomas about it the next Saturday. He laughed softly. "Michael would have liked you," he said. "You've got the same disease he had." "What disease?" "Wonder." That winter I quit the call center job. It was reckless, terrifying, and the smartest thing I've ever done. I found part-time work at a small independent bookstore near my apartment. The pay was half, the peace was double. The place smelled like paper and dust and quiet dreams. The owner, a kind man named David, didn't care about resumes. He just asked, "Do you like books?" And when I said yes, he said, "You're hired." The bookstore became my refuge. I'd work mornings and take photos in the afternoons. Most of them were terrible, blurry, crooked, awkwardly framed, but even the bad ones made me feel alive. I started to understand what Michael meant when he said, "Photography teaches you to pay attention." It was at that bookstore that I met Gabby. She came in on a Thursday evening, wearing a blue scarf and carrying a sketchbook. She asked if we had a copy of a photography book by Ansel Adams. Coincidentally, I'd just finished reading it for class and was shelving it at that very moment. I told her it wasn't just a good book, it was transformative. She smiled, surprised by my enthusiasm. She said, "You're a photographer?" I said, "Very amateur, but obsessed." We talked for 20 minutes about lighting, design, and how photography and graphic art intersect. Before she left, she said she came to the bookstore every week after work, and maybe I'd see her again. I did. Every Thursday. For weeks. Sometimes she'd browse, sometimes she'd talk, sometimes she'd just smile and wave. There was an ease about her, like she belonged in the kind of world I wanted to live in. One day, she asked if I knew any good places to practice landscape photography. I hesitated. My first thought was the overlook, but it felt sacred, private, like a secret that wasn't mine alone to give. So I told her, "I know a place, but I'd like to ask someone first." That weekend, I told Thomas about her. He chuckled softly, eyes shining with something that looked almost mischievous. "Bring her," he said. "If she understands what that place means to you, she's the right kind of person." A week later, Gabby and I drove up the same winding road I'd driven months before. The sun was dipping behind the ridges when we arrived. She stood at the railing, speechless, eyes reflecting the golden light. "This is incredible," she whispered. I told her the story, about Michael, about Thomas, about the letter that had rewritten my life. She listened without interrupting, her eyes glistening. When she finished, she said quietly, "Thank you for trusting me with that." After that day, everything changed. Gabby became part of my Saturdays. Sometimes she'd join us, sometimes she'd just listen while Thomas told old stories, and sometimes she'd bring her sketchbook and draw while I took photos. The three of us fell into a rhythm that didn't need explanation. An old man, a lost boy, and a woman who made the world brighter just by being in it. A few months later, my photography class held its first student exhibition. I submitted a series of photos I'd taken at the Overlook. Different seasons, different hours, always from the same bench. Thomas came to the show. He stood silently in front of the pictures, his hand pressed to his mouth. "You captured it," he said softly. "You captured him." I told him I learned from the best, from both of you. After the exhibition, as we stood outside in the cool evening air, Thomas said something I didn't expect. "You know, Ben, I used to think I was waiting for someone to finish Michael's story, but I think now I was waiting for someone to start their own." That night, driving home with Gabby beside me, I looked at the mountains silhouetted against the stars and thought about how strange it was, how a single saved GPS address had led me to all of this, a teacher, a friend, and a quiet kind of love that didn't rush or demand, just existed, steady and patient. By the end of that year, my life didn't look perfect. I still lived in the same apartment, still had bills stacked on the counter, still didn't have a grand plan. But for the first time, that didn't scare me. Because I finally understood what Michael meant when he said life isn't about having it all figured out. It's about staying curious enough to keep going. Every Saturday, as I drove up that winding road, I'd glance at the GPS. The screen was blank now. No saved addresses, no destination. But somehow, I always knew exactly where I was going.
A full year passed since the first time I followed that GPS. The seasons changed, but our Saturdays didn't. Every week, I found myself driving up the same mountain road. The turns familiar now, the view comforting, the silence between us filled with something that felt like peace. Thomas had become more than a friend. He was the kind of presence that makes the world feel steadier. Some weeks he was talkative, telling stories of his youth, his late wife, or the times he'd fixed old radios just to hear the static hum back to life. Other weeks he was quiet, content to sit beside me and watch the light fade. But no matter what, the bench never felt empty again. By then, Gabby had become part of our rhythm too. She'd sketch while I took photos, capturing the way the light spilled over Thomas's shoulders, or the way the valley turned gold before sunset. She fit so naturally into our small world that I sometimes forgot there'd been a time when I'd sat there alone. Then, one Saturday, the light hit differently. The air was still, the horizon burning with that late summer orange that makes everything look fragile. Thomas was quieter than usual. His movements were slower, his breathing a little heavier. When I asked if he was okay, he smiled softly. "Just tired," he said. But it wasn't the kind of tired that sleep could fix. We sat for a long while without speaking, watching clouds drift lazily across the mountains. Finally, Thomas said, "There's something I want to tell you." His voice was softer than the wind. "When Michael died, I thought the world was over. I didn't know how to keep living without him. Every morning I'd wake up and feel like breathing was an obligation, not a choice. Coming here every Saturday, waiting for someone who might never come, it gave me a reason to keep going. It was the only promise I had left." He turned to me, eyes glistening. "Then you showed up. You sat down beside me when you could have turned away. And since that day, Ben, I haven't been alone. You didn't just complete Michael's journey. You gave me back my life." I couldn't speak. My throat burned. The wind carried the smell of pine and earth, and I could feel tears forming even before I could understand what they meant. He smiled, almost teasingly. "You saved me." I shook my head. "No, Thomas. You saved me."
He chuckled, low and raspy, like gravel rolling in his chest. Maybe we saved each other. The sun dropped lower, painting the world in gold, the same way Michael must have seen it, the way he wanted someone else to see it one last time. We sat there until the cold crept in, the kind that makes the air feel thinner. When it was finally time to leave, Thomas reached out and squeezed my hand. His grip was still strong. "Promise me something," he said. "Anything. Keep coming, even when I can't." I nodded, unable to say the word yes out loud. He smiled. "Good, then we understand each other." That night, when I drove home, the road looked different. The darkness wasn't heavy anymore. The stars looked closer. A few months later, winter arrived. Snow blanketed the road, the trees, the bench. I still made the drive, even when it was hard. But one Saturday, Thomas wasn't there. His absence filled the air like a quiet echo. I waited for hours, telling myself he was just late, that maybe the snow had slowed him down. But deep down, I knew. That evening, I got the call. Thomas had passed away peacefully in his sleep the night before. The next Saturday, I went up alone. The bench was covered in frost. I brushed the snow away and sat, pulling Michael's letter from my jacket pocket, the same one I'd kept folded there for a year, its edges soft and worn now. I read it again, slowly this time, like a prayer. "Don't wait until you're dying to realize the point of life is to live it." The words hit differently now, heavier, but somehow more alive. I closed my eyes and imagined both of them there beside me, Thomas with his quiet wisdom, Michael with his camera, the light stretching over all of us like a promise kept. I kept my promise too. I went every Saturday, sometimes alone, sometimes with Gabby, sometimes with silence as my only companion, but I went, always. Gabby and I grew closer. She became my home in the same quiet, unexpected way that bench had. She encouraged me to keep taking photographs, to submit them to competitions, to believe they were worth something. One of those photos, a shot of Thomas sitting on the bench, his outline framed by the fire of the setting sun, won third place in a regional competition. When I saw my name printed under it, I thought of him smiling, saying, "That's all Michael ever wanted, for someone to take his letter seriously and actually live it." 2 years after that first drive, I still visit the overlook. The bench has weathered, the wood soft from rain and time, but it's still there, just like the view, just like the memory. Gabby comes with me most days now. Sometimes we talk about work, sometimes we just sit quietly, her hand resting in mine. And every time, when the sun begins to sink, I feel it again, that strange, peaceful ache of gratitude. I still don't have it all figured out. I still don't know where I'll be in 5 years or what I'll be doing. But I've stopped waiting for life to make perfect sense. I've learned that maybe the point isn't to have a plan. Maybe the point is just to follow what makes you curious, to show up for the small moments, to say yes even when you're not sure why. Because sometimes a random GPS address leads you to the exact place you're supposed to be. A place that feels like home. A friendship that saves your life. A love you didn't know you were ready for. And a quiet understanding that even in loss, something beautiful can still grow. So if you ever find yourself standing at a crossroads, unsure, tired, lost, follow the thing that stirs you, even if it seems small. You never know who might be waiting at the end of that road. Because that's how the universe works. It connects us, one small act of curiosity at a time. And sometimes, that's all it takes to find your way home.